An apple, a raven, and a writing desk. The story of Ever After High. Chapter 2. Ever After High. After the eradication of magic from the enchanted worlds, 20 years of nothing but peace followed. With this era of peace, a new generation of royals had been born, and to prepare them to follow in their parents' footsteps, they were all sent to Ever After High in the neutral kingdom of Storybrooke End. Apple White. Her skin was fair, just like her mother's, white as snow, her father would joke, and had platinum blonde hair that stretched down her back, ending at her shoulder blades. Her clothes were neat, clean, and very fashionable, even though she only ever wore different shades of red and pink. Beautiful was an understatement. Her looks alone had people ready to give her whatever she wanted, but her voice was even more beautiful. She could say anything to anyone and have them entranced. She was polite and well-mannered, like everyone else in the palace, and was only ever told no by her parents. They were the only ones immune to her beauty and charm. With only days until the start of her first day of her second year at Ever After High, 16-year-old Princess Apple White was finishing her packing while on video chat with Princess Ashlyn Charming. "I can't believe you're still packing." "What? I've got a year's worth of clothes to pack." Ashlyn laughed. "Have you heard from Briar?" Apple asked. "Yes, she said she was coming, but her parents wanted to talk to her." 3 sharp knocks came from the other side of Apple's door. "Enter," she yelled. One of her mother's servants entered. "Princess Apple, your father has requested your presence in the study." Apple turned to say goodbye to Ashlyn when her brother appeared behind her to give Ashlyn the same message. The girls exchanged looks and quickly said their goodbyes. After a long and anxious walk through the castle, Apple reached the study and knocked 3 times. "Enter," her mother's soft voice echoed. That night, each royal who was to attend Ever After High was told the news by their parents, that after months of an intense and very well-known trial, it was ruled that Ever After High, being one of the top schools in all the kingdom, would be open to all, not just those with royal blood, like it had been since its opening years ago. The news had shaken and disturbed everyone within the royal courts. However, the news had especially shaken Apple. It had been 3 days, and she only stopped pacing to sleep. "Gosh, Apple, you're making me dizzy," Briar said. But Apple ignored her and continued pacing and mumbling to herself. "Ash," Briar said, looking to Ashlyn for help. But Ashlyn's eyes were glued to her phone. "Ashlyn," Briar yelled. Ashlyn sat up and looked at her friends. "Sorry." Briar pointed at Apple, and Ashlyn grabbed her friend's arm and sat her down next to her on the bench. "Ruined," Apple yelled. "What's ruined?" Ashlyn asked. "What's ruined?" Apple rang. "Everything. There won't be any more perfect princess tea parties, or perfect princess lunches, or perfect princess sleepovers, or—" "We get it," Briar interrupted. "There won't be only royals at Ever After this year." "Exactly," Apple protested. "Everything will be different." "Not everything," Ashlyn insisted. "Name one thing." "This," Ashlyn smiled while gesturing to her 2 friends. Apple steadied herself, and the girls embraced. 2 completely black SUVs pulled up to the bench they were sitting at. "Your Highnesses," a nicely dressed royal guard said as he bowed and opened the car door. Apple got in first, with a huge yet genuine smile on her face, then Briar putting on her headphones and getting out her phone before stepping into the car. Alas, Ashlyn, who thanked the man, then joined her friends. After the girls' bags were loaded into the second car, they made their way towards the gates of the palace. Apple was comforted by her friend's words, but still couldn't shake the uneasy feeling. Too excited for the upcoming year, she pushed her feelings down and stared out the window as the car made its way to Storybrooke End. The school was massive, larger than any castle in any kingdom, with 4 main buildings. The car made its way over the grand bridge and towards the first building where the dorms were. The 3 princesses got out of the SUV with excitement, heading towards the castle-like doors of the building for room assignments, leaving the royal guards to unpack the second car. "I don't see Holly," Apple said, looking around. "I'll call her," said Briar. "See, Apple, nothing's different," Ashlyn said, interlocking arms with Apple. "No answer," said Briar, joining the conversation. Apple thought it was strange. Holly always answered, and she and Briar were supposed to room together this year. Once again, her excitement was high, and she chose not to think about it. The girls made their way to the desk for room assignments with the other princesses. The girls didn't need to say their names. Everyone knew who they were. A nicely groomed dwarf handed Ashlyn and Briar their keys and gave them the same room number, and Apple another key with a different room number. "Actually, Ashlyn and I are rooming together this year," Apple said, smiling, but was quickly cut off by the dwarf who had heard that many times that day. "Some rooms were moved around to make room for the new students," the dwarf said, not looking up from his computer. "Take it up with the headmaster." Apple smiled harder and put her hands together, trying to control her fury with the dwarf. Ashlyn took Apple's hand in hers in an attempt to comfort her friend. "Maybe you're with Holly this year," Briar added, trying to do the same. Apple steadied herself again and asked the dwarf who her roommate was. The answer shocked Apple to the point where she was numb. Raven Queen. Her skin was just as fair as Apple's, only hers had an underlying gray from not going outside a lot. Her hair was a deep black with purple highlights, and she kept it away from her face using a silver headband with spikes. She wore the same 4 outfits throughout the week, although you couldn't tell because they all looked the same. Black ripped jeans with a purple, black, or gray blouse, with exciting designs that looked like she had painted them on herself. Raven hadn't seen her mother since she was 7, but she didn't mind because she knew why they couldn't see each other, and she was okay with it. Instead of seeking out whoever her father was, her mother allowed Terrence Hightop, also known as Hatter, to take guardianship of her. Raven and Hatter's daughter had known each other their whole lives and were basically sisters. Madeline Hightop Hatter. She was shorter than average, although you would never notice with her personality being bigger than the room she was in. Her hair was blue and vibrant, curling and twisting down her back in voluptuous, perfect curls. Maddie and her father were remarkably close. She had the same wonder and madness in her as her father. Her clothes were beyond colorful, and her skirt puffed out in the shape of an upside-down teacup, and a small, round, purple top hat with a gold cup handle sat on her head. 3 days earlier, 16-year-old Raven was sitting on the windowsill of her and Maddie's bedroom, twisting a spark of purple magic between her fingers. She suddenly stopped when she heard Hatter's and Maddie's laughs coming towards the bedroom door. "Heavy lies the head that wields the magic," Hatter said, bouncing into the room with Maddie not far behind. Hatter reached into his hat, and before she knew it, a round table with 3 chairs was pulled from it. Maddie and Raven both sat down, but Hatter stopped and looked confused into his hat. Then, as if he had remembered what he was doing, he held his hat over the center of the table, and a pyramid of scones, cupcakes, and cookies fell out, along with 3 cups of piping hot tea. Maddie chuckled to herself, as if she had heard a joke no one else could. "News, news, news. We have great news," said Hatter, sitting down with the girls. "News?" Raven questioned. They never got news. "1 lump or 2, Maddie said, flinging sugar towards her father. "Cream," Hatter added, while bouncing the sugar off a spoon back at his daughter. "Scones or cookies?" Maddie said, turning to Raven. News," she asked, before being cut off by Maddie. "Or cake, or pie, or wait, Dad, there's no pie," Maddie questioned. "No pie, or strudel, or biscuits, or—" Hatter paused, then as if he hadn't just been talking, he asked, 3 lumps or 4, or cream?" "Cream! I love cream," Maddie interrupted. The random banter and questions grew to the point where Raven couldn't handle it anymore. Her eyes turned dark purple and her voice lowered. "Enough," she yelled, with a wave of magic settling the room. Maddie and her father froze before continuing on with tea like nothing had happened. "Headmaster Grimm and the Grand Royal Courts have reached a decision. Ever After High is to be open to all students, and I signed you and Madeline up to attend classes there together this year." "What?" Raven yelled. Hatter didn't look up from his mug, but a small smile crept onto his face as Maddie leaned over and wrapped her arms around Raven while chuckling to herself. The last 3 days went by in a blur for Raven, and by the end she found herself walking with Maddie towards the castle-like doors of the first building of Ever After High. Maddie looked over at her friend and noticed the blank expression on her face. "Don't be a worry, Flurry," Maddie said, chuckling. Raven couldn't help but smile at her. "This place is beautiful and huge and beautiful," continued Maddie, "and we're here together. And look, there's the enchanted forest and the dark forest and the ancient library." Maddie continued naming things they saw. With each one, Raven's mood grew. "She's right," Raven thought. "This place is beautiful, and I'm here with Maddie." The two girls entered the building for room assignments when they stopped, noticing a commotion at the front desk. Suddenly, Raven heard a blonde-haired princess yell her name when a stunned-looking dwarf looked over at her. Within seconds of the dwarf noticing her, everyone's eyes were following her as she and Maddie walked fully into the room. After a few moments filled with gasps and whispers along with stares, Maddie's high-pitched voice rang out. "Hello." Raven put her head in her hands in disbelief. "I'm Maddie, and this is Raven." Ashlyn Charming. Her hair was longer than most, with its loose brownish-red curls looping their way down her back. Her skin was tan from being outside a lot. She loved it there. The hallways and corridors of Charming Castle felt small and choking to her, although her siblings felt that the outside was dirty. Ashlyn was a part of a set of quadruplets, her siblings being Daring, Dexter, and Darling Charming, with Ashlyn being the oldest and in line for the throne. Ashlyn was always remarkably close with her siblings, but still felt out of place with them. Her siblings were blonde and fair-skinned, and they all liked different things. The morning of her first day, Ashlyn was sitting on the steps of her family's castle with her siblings while waiting for their car. Dexter was typing something on his tablet while Darling played with her cat and Daring talked furiously to his siblings. "Non-royals? Seriously? At our school? Sharing a classroom or even worse, a lunch table?" Daring said while pacing, but then stopped in fear of messing up his hair. Daring fixed his hair in the golden mirror he always carried, then continued, but at this point his siblings had stopped listening to him. Darling and Ashlyn exchanged looks, mocking their brother. Two all-black SUVs pulled up to the steps, and a nicely dressed royal guard bowed and opened the door for the siblings. "Are you sure you don't want to ride with us?" Dexter asked Ashlyn. "Yeah, please," added Darling. "It'll be torture without you," she said, looking at Daring, who was focused on his mirror. "I promised Apple," Ashlyn explained. Ashlyn hugged her sister and assured her that they would all meet for lunch in Storybrooke End. Dexter and Darling thanked the royal guard, then stepped into the car. "Fine," huffed Daring, "but I'm picking where we eat. I'm sick of that dairy-free stuff you call food," Daring said, getting into the car in a huff. The two SUVs made their way off of the palace grounds towards Ever After, and Ashlyn made her way towards a bench to wait for her friends, when she got a message that instantly made her light up with joy, and a smile quickly appeared on her face. Before Ashlyn could respond to the message, a small yet sharp voice called out. "No," the voice called. Ashlyn looked up and saw a small bluebird falling out of the tree she was walking past. The princess quickly stepped over the bird's path to catch it. In her hand, the bird shook and steadied itself. "Good morning, BB," Ashlyn said softly. "Good morning, Ashlyn," the bird said back before bowing, then rejoining its family in the tree. Ashlyn looked around worried until she was sure no one was around. She sat down on the bench while a long white and silver limo pulled up next to her. "Good morning," Ashlyn said, greeting her two friends as they stepped out of the limo. "Morning," replied Briar, she said while lowering the sunglasses that sat on her head over her eyes. Apple did not respond and immediately started to pace. Briar sat down next to her and began to talk, but Ashlyn was responding to the message she had gotten and didn't hear what Briar said. "Ashlyn," Briar yelled. She jumped and apologized for not paying attention. Once Ashlyn had realized why Briar was calling her name, she comforted her friend. Then, once again, two all-black SUVs pulled up and the girls got in, and they made their way to Storybrooke End. Though on their way, Ashlyn spent the entire time texting and smiling to herself. Holly and Poppy Fitz Herbert. The princesses of Corona were twins. Holly was older by a hair, her grandmother would say, and therefore in line for the throne. Poppy admired her sister's leadership skills and knew she could never lead a kingdom like Holly could, and she was okay with that. She preferred to spend her time practicing her hair and makeup skills. She was incredibly talented when it came to those things. Holly used to be as well, but was now too busy with royal duties and was at school for most of the year. Holly, however, did not mind, and loved the thought of one day leading and protecting her kingdom like her mother and grandmother did before her. She was kind, gentle, and incredibly caring. She would give a stranger the clothes off her back if need be, which was a rare trait for someone in the royal court. She was loyal to a fault and would do anything for the people she cared about. Her hair was incredibly long, almost to the floor, light brown, and usually in some sort of elegant hairstyle to keep it from sweeping the ground. That was done by her sister, who had short hair with part of her head shaved and dyed purple. Holly loved her hair. It was special, but no one could know how special, her mother would remind her. Even with Holly's busy schedule, the sisters were always together and wished they could hang out more. Holly arrived at the grand dining hall in her family's castle. Her family were having a big dinner together before she went back to school. These dinners usually excited everyone, but her family seemed overly excited this time. "What's going on?" Holly said, sitting down next to her sister. "I don't know," Poppy said, smiling. She was lying. They could always tell when the other wasn't being honest, but Poppy wasn't even trying to sound convincing. Holly had no idea what it could be about. New tiaras, or maybe her Nana was going to tell a story. While going through the list of possibilities in her head, Holly was snapped back into the room by her mother tapping a spoon against her glass. "I couldn't have asked for a better family," Queen Rapunzel said while squeezing her husband's hand and looking at her parents. "And I couldn't be more thankful for our daughters. I know Holly is leaving in the morning, and you two hate to be apart." Poppy smiled harder, and Holly was still confused. "However, as of this morning," her mother continued, "it has been decided that non-royals and those who aren't in line for a throne or advisor position can now attend Ever After High." Holly's confusion grew into excitement as she turned to her sister, who was just as excited as she was. "So your mother and I signed Poppy up for classes this year," King Eugene added. The two princesses were so excited they hugged each other so dramatically that they almost fell over. Holly loved school, but there was never a moment she didn't miss her sister. After dinner, the sisters ran to Poppy's bedroom to pack her things for the year. However, in her excitement, Holly forgot about the others that would be at Ever After this year, or meeting her friends in the morning, or even the promise she had made to her friend Briar Beauty. Huntsman. In the middle of Main Street, to the Fourth Kingdom, a boy with dark brown hair and tan skin named Hunter worked at his family's butcher shop packing meat. He hated it there. His family for generations had been hunters, and although he was easily the most skilled archer in his family to date, he hated meat. Everything about it made Hunter sick. The smell, the texture, the color, even the taste, and seeing the animals being hunted didn't make it any better. In fact, on more than one occasion, he would let the animals go before his father had a chance to catch them. This created lots of tension between him and his father. Hunter loved the outdoors. It was the only place he felt himself. As he was looking up through the trees of the forest, he snapped back into focus as he noticed a small deer running past him through the trees. Precious, he thought to himself before a large hand came up behind him and pinched his ear. "What are you doing?" his father demanded. "Nothing, I was just," Hunter started before being cut off by his father. "Exactly," his father snapped, letting go of his ear. "Let's go, it's getting dark," the huntsman said, shaking his head in disappointment. Enough, Hunter thought. I can't do it anymore. The young man walked around his father and stopped in front of him, reaching into his pocket and pulling out a flyer. Before Hunter could even speak, his father read the flyer. He scoffed. "Your place is here, not at some school for royals." "No, it isn't," Hunter argued, "and we both know that." "You're a huntsman," his father protested. "You're just young, you'll grow into it." "No, I won't. I love archery, but I won't kill. That won't change." The huntsman stood there, shocked by his son's words, but the shock quickly turned into rage. He hit his son on the back of the head. "You're a huntsman, that won't change," then started to walk away. Holding the back of his head, Hunter replied, Mom signed the paperwork. I leave in the morning." His father stopped in shock, then continued towards their house without saying a word. The next morning, Hunter and his mother were standing on the platform for his train to Ever After. "You packed a heavy jacket, right?" his mother said, sniffing. "Yes, Mom," Hunter said, smiling, then hugged his mother. Hunter looked around longingly. "Your father loves you," his mother assured him. "Yeah, okay," said Hunter, shrugging. They hugged again, and Hunter went to the edge of the platform to board his train, when an arm turned him around and gave him a strong embrace. After a few moments, they pulled away from each other, and Hunter saw his teary-eyed father handing him the brand-new bow he had been saving up for. "You will always be a Huntsman, and my son," his father said through his tears. They hugged once more before Hunter boarded his train, and looked out of the window from his seat and waved to his parents until they were out of sight. He felt tears well up in his eyes, but pushed them down when he remembered he'd be back in a year. Settling into his seat, Hunter got out his phone and sent a text message. He waited anxiously for a reply, and as soon as he got it, his face lit up with joy, and he continued texting the rest of the train ride. The school grounds were more beautiful than any place he had ever been. He quickly took note of the gates in the east that led to the enchanted forest, but was quickly pulled from his thoughts when he noticed a group of well-dressed princes looking him up and down, giving disgusted looks. One blonde-haired prince in particular seemed completely appalled by Hunter's presence. Hunter looked down at what he was wearing, his favorite pair of army green-colored pants that were covered in rips and tears, black boots, and a tan long-sleeve shirt with a green hooded vest. He looked back up at the group, straightened himself, and smiled before walking into the castle-like doors of the first building of Ever After High. He was immediately greeted by a heated argument between a blonde-haired princess and another student, but was completely distracted by a different princess that made the boy blush.